The first thing was silence. Not the gentle silence of dawn or prayer, but the thick, unnatural quiet that swallows armies before the storm. In that stillness, thousands of men stood waiting, a forest of shields, spears, and restless hearts. Every boot planted in the churned earth seemed to hold its breath, as if the ground itself was unsure which way history would tilt. At the center of this silence sat King Alaric the Iron-Blooded. He did not speak, nor did he need to. His presence carried the weight of a crown forged not by inheritance, but by blood and conquest. His armor, blackened with years of war, gleamed faintly under a pale sky, each dent a memory, each scratch a testament. His soldiers called him Iron-Blooded not only because of his ruthless victories, but because he bled little and demanded much. Alaric's gaze was fixed on the horizon, a wall of dark hills and whispering trees where an enemy waited unseen. He knew betrayal lingered there, though he did not yet know the hand that would wield it. Around him, banners of crimson snapped in a restless wind, their edges frayed but proud, carrying the sigil of a stone encircled by flame, the mark of his house, the mark of destiny. Closer still, beside the throne of iron mounted upon a wagon, lay a thing more unsettling than all the soldiers, weapons, or banners, a stone. Small enough to fit in both hands, yet heavier than any crown. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat muffled in rock. The court whispered that it was cursed, that it drank the king's soul a little more with every victory. Alaric had dismissed such talk, calling it the jealous lies of weak men. Yet when he was alone, he would sometimes press his hand to it and feel the echo of himself staring back. The silence broke when Kael stumbled into the story. He was not a soldier nor a noble, but a thief caught among war and kings by mistake or fate. Cloaked in shadows, his eyes darted across the camp's edges, looking not for honor but for escape. To him, kings were just men with sharper blades, and curses were stories to keep peasants obedient. And yet, though he should have fled that place of armies and impending slaughter, something bound his gaze to the stone. Even before he touched it, he felt it tug at the frayed edges of his soul. Night descended like a veil pulled too quickly. Fires flickered. Armor groaned. Soldiers sharpened blades not out of need, but to quiet their thoughts. Alaric called his captains, voices low, commands precise, his tone the iron weight that had kept a kingdom from splintering. Yet beneath every order was the unspoken knowledge that a shadow deeper than any forest was closing in. Then came the omen. A raven silent, blacker than the sky, descended upon the stone. It perched for a heartbeat, then struck it with its beak. The sound was wrong, like bone cracking where no bone should be. The men froze. The raven vanished. And in the stillness that followed, the stone glowed faintly, like an ember refusing to die. Alaric did not show fear, but he felt it. His hand, hardened by decades of sword and shield, trembled once before he clenched it. Tomorrow, he said, breaking the silence for the first time, the world will either kneel or burn. His men roared in response, their voices rising like thunder, but thunder meant nothing to the storm already gathering beyond the trees. Somewhere in the shadows, Kael tightened his grip on the dagger at his belt, unaware that his path had already been chosen for him. He did not yet know that he would outlive the king, that centuries would bury the armies and the banners, but not the stone. Not the soul trapped inside. The silence returned. Heavy. Expectant. The night before legend. The storm that had lingered on the horizon now pressed closer, dragging its weight across the sky. Lightning licked the ridges, thunder rattled the campfires, and the soldiers of King Alaric the Iron-Blooded tried to pretend they did not hear the forest breathing around them. Men sharpened blades not for need, but for courage. Dice clattered, songs rose and died in half-hearted strains, and whispers grew like weeds through the tents. Whispers of omens, of shadows in the trees, of the stone. Inside the king's pavilion, the air was thicker than outside. The stone lay at the heart of the room, resting on a blackened altar, its veins glowing faintly as if it absorbed every strike of lightning in the sky. Around it hung silence, not the natural quiet of reverence, but the strained hush of fear. Even the guards, hardened men who had watched empires crumble, shifted uneasily when its glow flared. Alaric sat before it, his iron crown resting on the arm of his chair, his gauntlets folded loosely in his lap. He was a man used to command, but tonight his gaze was unfixed, his thoughts wandering into places no general's map could chart. Every victory, every throne he had broken to his will, he owed to the presence of that stone. Yet for every triumph, he felt more diminished. Merrick, his captain and confidant, broke the silence. Majesty, the men are restless. They whisper of betrayal in the ranks. Some say the gods themselves have turned their faces from us. Alaric's eyes slid from the stone to his captain. Marek's scars told the story of 2 decades of loyalty. Majesty, I have stood with you in victories I thought impossible. I have followed you when wiser men fled. But I tell you this now as a friend, not a captain, that stone is not our ally. It is a weight around your soul. Cast it aside before it devours us all. Alaric's head snapped up, eyes blazing with iron certainty, or was it desperation? Without it, Merrick, I would not be king. Without it, none of this exists. Would you rather I was a forgotten chieftain, my bones lost in some nameless valley? No. The stone gave me a throne. And if it asks a price, I will pay it. Lightning tore across the sky, flooding the tent with sudden brilliance. In that moment, Kael saw Alaric's face illuminated, not the face of a man, but of something already half-consumed by the relic's glow. The storm growled. The stone pulsed harder. And across the camp, the whispers grew into quiet panic. Some men gathered their gear. Others clutched talismans, muttering prayers to gods they had not spoken to in years. Tomorrow would bring war, but tonight, fear was the sharper weapon. And as Kael slipped back into the darkness, one truth seared itself into his mind. The king might command an army, but it was the stone that commanded the king. The dawn never truly came. Instead, a bruised light bled across the horizon, as if the sky itself recoiled from what it was about to witness. Mist clung to the trees, curling like smoke, smothering sound until the world felt suffocated. The army rose in silence. No songs, no boasts, not even the clang of steel and jest. They dressed as if for a funeral, each man fastening his armor with the weight of finality. Even the captains avoided each other's gaze. Only the king seemed unshaken. Alaric the Iron-Blooded emerged from his pavilion clad in blackened mail, the iron crown set firm upon his brow. The cursed stone was bound to his chest in a harness of leather and steel, close to his heart, its faint glow pulsing like a second heartbeat. To the men it was a relic of doom, to Alaric it was his throne's foundation. Today, he said, his voice carrying unnaturally far through the mist, we carve our fate from the bones of those who defy us. The men roared as commanded, but it was a roar without conviction, the kind shouted only because silence was worse. They marched into the forest. At first, the trees seemed ordinary, just another barrier to be crossed. But as the hours dragged, the road narrowed, the canopy swallowed the sky, and the formation frayed into a long, stumbling serpent. Trumpet calls muffled against bark. Wagons creaked and snagged. And always the silence. Then, without warning, the silence ended. An arrow hissed through the air, striking a centurion clean through the throat. Another buried itself in a shield, another in a horse's flank. Panic spread in a ripple. From the trees came the war cry of unseen foes, raw and thunderous, echoing from every direction. The ambush had begun, but for every command he gave, the forest swallowed half, and by the time orders reached the rear, they had twisted into nonsense. Form ranks. Retreat. Hold ground. Confusion became its own enemy. And then betrayal struck. From within the king's own guard, steel flashed where loyalty should have stood. A captain, once sworn by blood, turned his spear upon Merrick, lunging for the king's side. Merrick met him head-on, the clash of blades sharp enough to pierce the din of battle. Alaric whirled, stunned, as 2 more soldiers joined the traitor, cutting down their brothers in arms with ruthless precision. The shouts reached the men around them. The king is cursed. The stone damns us all. The words spread faster than arrows. In that moment, doubt became a second ambush. Alaric struck down one betrayer with a fury that shook the ground, but inside he faltered. Was it true? Was this slaughter not the work of enemies, but the curse he had carried into every battle? The stone's glow seared hotter, as if mocking him. He felt its pulse invade his chest, each beat louder than the next, drowning his thoughts. The battlefield blurred. Through the haze of smoke and blood, Alaric saw visions, faces of men he had slain, kingdoms burning, rivers of ash. But in those same visions he also saw something darker, himself, seated on a throne of bone, endless legions chanting his name in terror. His sword wavered. Majesty! Marek's cry cut through the storm. His captain was bloodied, one arm useless, but his eyes still burned with loyalty. Fight it! You are not the stone, you are the king. For a heartbeat, Alaric believed him. And then the stone erupted. Light burst from his chest, a crimson wave that lit the mist and carved shadows into monstrous shapes. Men, enemy, and ally alike staggered back in horror as the king's voice rose in a roar not entirely his own. His form seemed larger, his movements faster, his blows fueled by something beyond flesh. He cut through foes like a storm unchained, each strike leaving aftershocks that shook the ground. The traitors died screaming, but no cheer followed. The soldiers nearest him recoiled, seeing not a savior, but a figure swallowed by unnatural power. Kael, crouched at the battlefield's edge, watched with wide eyes. He had come only to scavenge, to survive, but now he saw something that shook him to his marrow. The stone was not a tool. It was a master. And Alaric, the Iron-Blooded, had become its vessel. When the light dimmed, hundreds lay dead. The forest was silent again, broken only by the whimpering of wounded men and the drip of blood onto sodden earth. Do it without question. His hands shook. He should flee, vanish into the wilderness, let kings and curses consume each other. But something in his bones told him his fate had already been tied to that stone, whether he accepted it or not. Night fell again, heavy and suffocating. The remnants of the army huddled in fractured camps, their fires dim, their voices lower still. Word spread like infection. The king is cursed. The king is no longer ours. Inside his pavilion, Alaric sat hunched over, the stone resting against his chest like a second heart. He had removed his crown, setting it beside him on the table. His reflection in the polished metal was unrecognizable, eyes burning red at the edges, lines carved deeper into his face, a shadow of something other than himself curling around his shoulders. Marek entered, limping, pale with blood loss. He did not bow. "You think me damned," Alaric said before Marek could speak. "I think you're still fighting," Marek replied. "And that's the only reason I'm still here." Alaric almost laughed, but it came out as a hollow sound. "If I am fighting, Marek, I am losing. Every time the stone saves me, I feel less of myself remain." My voice grows quieter. Its voice grows louder. He pressed a hand against his chest, teeth clenched. "Tell me, old friend, when do I cease to be a king and become a ghost chained to a rock?" Marek's voice softened. "Not if you choose differently. Power is not worth the loss of your soul." Alaric's gaze flicked toward the crown on the table, then to the stone. "Without power, Marek, kings are nothing but men waiting to be forgotten." The silence stretched between them until a cry shattered it. A scout burst into the pavilion, face pale with terror. "Majesty, the tribes march. Thousands. They surround us. At dawn they will strike." The stone pulsed violently, almost eagerly, at the words. Alaric felt it surge through him, begging to be unleashed again, promising victory bought in fire and blood. But Marek's hand gripped his arm, grounding him. "You know the price," Marek said. "Use it again, and you won't return." "Not truly. The men already look at you as if you are a curse. Another dawn like today, and they will no longer call you king, they will call you monster." Alaric's jaw clenched, torn between loyalty and survival, between crown and soul. Outside, Kael listened, heart pounding. He could not yet see the future, but he knew the choice made here, tonight, would decide whether the world remembered Alaric as a savior, a tyrant, or something far worse. The storm gathered once more, rattling the pavilion. The air itself seemed to wait, expectant, as if the world knew dawn would bring not just battle, but destiny. And in the shadows, the stone pulsed louder still. Dawn came red. Not the red of sunrise, but the red of firelight reflecting off steel. The tribes had gathered in a ring around the camp, their war cries rolling like thunder through the trees. Drums pounded, horns shrieked, and the ground itself seemed to tremble beneath their rage. Within the circle of death, the last of Alaric's men braced themselves. They were fewer than half of what they had been, hollow-eyed and blood-stained, their faith frayed beyond mending. Some gripped their swords with shaking hands, others whispered prayers with lips too dry to form words. And at the heart of them stood King Alaric, the stone bound to his chest, its crimson glow searing against his armor. He could feel its hunger. It wanted blood, enemy or ally, it did not matter. Each heartbeat felt less like his own and more like the stone's rhythm pounding through him. Merrick, limping but unbroken, drew close. "Majesty, this is the end. If you unleash it again, you won't come back." Alaric turned his face to him, and for the first time, Merrick saw something like sorrow in the iron-blooded king's eyes. "Perhaps I have already not come back." The horns blared. The forest erupted. The tribes surged forward in a storm of spears and axes. The last battle began. The Romans had taught Kael that kings were untouchable, that their word was law carved into stone. But on this day he saw a king unravel. He watched from the shadows as Alaric fought with a savagery beyond men, every strike of his blade leaving arcs of crimson light. Warriors fell before him like wheat to a scythe, and yet each blow drained him. The stone was not lending power. It was feeding on him. The army cheered and recoiled in the same breath. Their king was winning, but at a price that terrified them more than defeat. Merrick fought beside him, deflecting a blow meant for Alaric's neck, cutting down a foe even as his own knees buckled. "Alaric," he shouted. "And this. Throw the stone away." But Alaric could not. The strap seemed fused to him, the glow now burning into his flesh. He bellowed, voice echoing with something inhuman, as if the stone itself had found its tongue through him. "I am eternal." The men froze at the sound, horror flickering across their faces. The iron-blooded king, once flesh and mortal, now spoke as though he was no longer his own. And then the turn. Kael saw it first. In the chaos of slaughter, Merrick collapsed, a spear buried deep in his side. Alaric turned, cutting down the attacker, but too late. His captain, his brother-in-arms, the last anchor to his humanity, lay dying. Marek's hand reached weakly for him. "Alaric, do not let it take you." The words tore through the king like no weapon ever could. For the first time, his grip on the stone faltered. He looked into Marek's dimming eyes and saw not fear, not judgment, only love. The stone pulsed violently, resisting, binding itself tighter, refusing to release its vessel. Alaric fell to his knees, torn between the roar of battle and the whisper of his soul. "Enough," he growled. "You have taken my men. You will not take me." He tore at the harness, flesh ripping, blood spraying, the stones searing into his skin like molten iron. He screamed, a sound that silenced even the tribes for a heartbeat. With one final wrench, he ripped the stone from his chest. It burned in his hands, its light a violent storm. The world seemed to tilt, the trees bowing inward, the sky darkening as though the sun itself recoiled. Alaric looked down at Merrick, whose final breath trembled on his lips. The king pressed the stone into his friend's dying hands. "If I cannot live free, then I will die so." Then, with a cry that shook the battlefield, he hurled himself and Merrick, stone and all, into the chasm that split the earth beyond the camp. The tribes rushed forward, but they were too late. The king, the captain, and the cursed relic vanished into darkness. Silence. The enemy stood bewildered. The remnants of Alaric's men stood stunned. The drums fell quiet, the horns lowered. For the first time, the forest did not echo with rage but with awe. Kael crept to the edge of the chasm, his heart pounding. The smoke cleared just enough to show the faintest red glow, deep below in the abyss, like an ember refusing to die. He whispered the words he did not mean to speak. "It waits." And in that moment, he knew the story was not over. The chasm had closed over the king. Smoke still curled upward, carrying with it the last roar of the Iron-Blooded. His army, once a living wall of iron and discipline, was now reduced to fragments scattered across the field. The tribes who had sworn to erase his name stood in silence, unsettled, as though victory had left no taste in their mouths. And there, on the broken ridge, Kael knelt. He had watched a legend fall, not to steel, not to numbers, but to a choice. A king who had carved his empire from rivers of blood had chosen at last to deny the very power that had made him. Not even Kael, a man hardened by hunger and betrayal, could comprehend such a sacrifice. The survivors whispered in low tones. Some said the king was dead, and with him his curse. Others swore that the glow beneath the earth meant otherwise. That the stone, heavy and patient, had only sunk deeper, waiting. Kael could not look away. The faint ember pulsed in the abyss below, like a heartbeat muffled in stone. It did not die. It would not die. And though he had never worn a crown nor commanded an army, he felt it staring into him, as though choosing. He turned away at last, forcing his legs to move. His hands shook, though not from fear of death. He had lived with that every day of his life. This was different. This was fear of destiny. Weeks passed. The tribes withdrew, wary of a king who might yet rise. The remnants of Alaric's men scattered to distant provinces, some swearing to bury his memory, others carrying it like a prayer. In taverns and markets, the tale grew. They said a raven had guided him to his doom. They said the stone had demanded his soul. They said he had leapt into the abyss not as a man, but as a god too dangerous to live. The truth was simpler and heavier. A king had chosen to end his reign, but the curse had not ended with him. Kael traveled alone now, a shadow slipping from ruin to ruin. But no matter how far he walked, he could not outrun the echo. In every quiet moment, he felt the pulse again, faint, steady, patient. The stone had marked him. Not with chains, not with scars, but with inevitability. At night he dreamed of it. A crown of iron rusting into dust. A battlefield soaked in blood. A king's voice echoing from the dark, "If I cannot live free, I will die so." But beneath it, another whisper, softer and far older, "I wait." He would wait gasping, dagger in hand, heart pounding to the rhythm of the stone's beat. Years turned to generations. The world forgot the man, but it did not forget the curse. Villages built shrines at the edge of the chasm, leaving offerings to keep the stone's hunger quiet. Kings feared the tale, yet envied it, for what ruler did not long for a power that promised eternity? But eternity is never given freely. And deep below, where earth met shadow, the stone endured. Its glow was no longer bright, but it did not need to be. Power does not shout, it waits. Kael became the keeper of a story he did not want. He carried it like a thief carries a stolen blade, knowing one day it would cut him. His life stretched on longer than it should have, his body aging slower, his nights filled with visions of the abyss. The stone had not chosen a king this time. It had chosen a witness. And a witness, sooner or later, becomes a participant. Centuries later, when scholars dig into ruins and storytellers whisper in firelight, they do not agree on the details. Was Alaric a tyrant or a martyr? Was Kael a thief or a prophet? Did the stone contain the soul of a king or the hunger of something far older? But on one thing they agree. The stone was never lost. It is there still, beneath earth and time, patient as silence. It does not need armies. It does not need thrones. It needs only the right hands, the desperate, the bold, or the doomed. Because legends never truly die. They wait.